varnish on her mouth, shadows in the gallery. Museums don't sleep, they stabilize. When the last stroller squeaks out and the docents hang their lanyards like little penances, the building changes languages. Daytime speaks in audio guides and soft shoes. Night speaks in lux levels and relative humidity, magnetic contacts and case alarms. The HVAC hum becomes a kind of prayer. Microclimate vitrines exhale through charcoal filters. The floor holds a memory of every footfall and decides which ones to keep. If you've never stood alone in a darkened gallery and listened to a tapestry breathe, you don't know how loud preservation can be. My name is Adrian, and by title I'm Chief of Collection Security at the Hallowell. In practice, I'm a translator between the human impulse to look and the material world's refusal to be looked at forever. The control room is my pulpit, a wall of monitors showing infrared ghosts of galleries, a rack of servers that exhale the weather they prefer, a console where every contact switch, motion sensor, and vitrine seal reports in a patient monotone. My earpiece says my name like a polite emergency. I can tell which guard is walking a stone hall by the way the microphone hears their key ring. I can tell when a case deserves a glass wipe by the oily signature of a forehead at child height. Myra, my wife, then made exhibitions. She could sketch a room into existence with a carpenter's pencil and a raised eyebrow. She talked about sightlines and thresholds the way some people talk about sex. She knew how to make a piece of paper on a wall behave like a revelation. She didn't wear perfume. She carried the resinous scent of foam core and fresh paint. We said our vows in a courthouse where the clerk stamped permission on our enthusiasm. We bought 2 coffees too late in the day and drank them on the museum steps, still wearing the bare rings that made our hands look like promises. Sometimes our schedules folded together like origami. After the last visitor left the big atrium, she'd come down to the control room and sit on my desk cross-legged, black jeans powdered with sawdust. She had a habit of hooking 2 fingers into my belt and kissing me like she was approving a blueprint. I had a habit of setting my mouth in the small valley beside her throat and breathing there, slow, until the static in her shoulders made a different kind of electricity. We shook the building's hand with our restraint and stopped before the cameras couldn't pretend not to see. The first odd thing arrived disguised as a polite data point. In Gallery 4, the Dutch room we keep dim on purpose, Lux spiked by 12 for exactly 30 seconds sometime after midnight. That's the numerical equivalent of someone forgetting to close a door all the way. The case on the Rembrandt sketch registered a pressure burp, a hiccup in its seal that corrected itself as if ashamed. On the camera, nothing, because cameras don't show what they aren't allowed to. I wrote it off as the HVAC sneezing and told myself to be less poetic. 2 nights later, the same hiccup. Lux up 12. Case seal down a whisper, then smug again. The temperature in the microclimate box drifted half a degree warmer than the rest of the room, the way breath would do if it cared about rules. A floor vibration sensor caught a signature we label heels with intention. Not a guard. Not a thief dumb enough to be detectable. Something that made the building glance away and pretend not to notice it had been kissed. I took out the tiny kit we use when we train new guards about touch. A finger of fluorescent powder invisible until it chooses not to be. I brushed a breath under the inner lip of the Dutch room's door handle, licked a line along the underside of the main case where only a thoughtless hand would ever reach, dotted a whisper on the hidden latch of the back-of-house door to the service corridor. I placed a single strand of silk down the seam where the door met its frame, so fine a breath could break it, so loyal it would tell me who'd tried. Then I closed up the room and went back to listening to the building recite its psalms. Myra came later with a roll of plans under her arm and a pencil behind her ear. She perched on my desk and fed me a bite of an apple tart the cafe sent down for the night crew. "Your galleries feel like an opera during dress rehearsal," she said. "Everything working very hard to pretend not to be alive." "Gallery 4 is flirting with the light," I said. That tilt of her head, 30 degrees toward honesty, 10 toward trouble. I slid my palm to the side of her throat, not pressure, just that acknowledgement, here is where you begin. Something in her loosened like tape coming away from a wall without tearing paint. Have the conversation," she said. "What do you want to call it?" I asked, because men who care about alarms still want definitions. "Open." She set the word down like a small sculpture we were meant to walk around. "Not chaos, not cruelty. We write rules, no one who reports to you, no one who pays me. We tell first. We keep each other first. Condoms are non-negotiable. Our bed is ours. The museum," she glanced up as if the cameras needed to hear it, "is sacred. You designed the gallery, and now you want me to guard it," I said. "I want to use the word I'm asking for," she said. She wasn't lying. That mattered, even if it didn't repair anything in advance. We drafted our treaty on the back of a lighting plot and sealed it with our mouths. Paper doesn't know how to be brave. People pretend for it. In the morning, the silk thread at the door seam lay in 2 short admissions on the floor. The underside of the handle sang to my UV like a bruise under stage makeup. The case latch hummed the same low note. Against the plinth, the part only a body would lean when it shouldn't. A half-moon print of something dark, glossy, the color of a berry with intentions. I could have lived with the ghost, but the other man was not a ghost. His name arrived in the director's email about a new commission, Kale Ibarra. The museum was courting him for an installation in the atrium. His work looked like a rumor with weight, glass and steel leaning toward one another as if the air between them had whispered a dare. Myra had championed him. Of course she had. He came to a walkthrough wearing a coat like a decision. His handshake was exactly the pressure he wanted a room to remember. He glanced at my badge and smiled with the self-respect of men, used to entering locked places. "You keep a clean museum," he said. His voice was all tape measures and wordless agreements. "The museum keeps itself," I answered. "I apologize for it when it forgets." At home that night, Myra stood with her palms on the counter and told me. "I used the word I asked for," she said. "I didn't keep to the sanctuary. That part was wrong." She didn't excuse anything. She didn't ask me to pretend. She put my hand on her chest as if calibrating a piece of equipment that mattered and said, "I want to be honest enough not to destroy us." "What time?" I asked. Because when you live in a building that divides the day into quarter hours and alarms, you think minutes can make you righteous. She looked at me with something I can only call pity and love. "It doesn't improve with a timestamp," she said. We tried. For a while we were careful citizens of the tiny country we built. She kept the museum sacred. I put the powder back in the drawer. The building and I made up. The Dutch room minding its lux, the cases humming their gentle grammar, the guards telling good jokes in the break room and bad ones in the galleries where the paintings could hear. We slept often enough in the same bed to call it ours. Then a storage room that never lies told me to pay attention. In the photography vault, a sealed, cool, clean rectangle that smells faintly of paper and silver. The data logger ticked up 2 degrees at 03:13, and then behaved as if it hadn't. On the inner lip of the rolling ladder, just where a hand would snag to steady a body, the UV sang. On the table where print boxes wait to be seen, a faint smear of lipstick only visible if you knew exactly how to tilt your head. Not Myra's shade, adjacent, aspirational. We separated like people who understood that love and architecture sometimes share a flaw. You can align the sightlines and still discover the view makes you lonely. She found a place with windows that gave morning a key. I kept the chipped mug the overnight crew chose for me and the slim pocket knife I used to open crates like a surgeon. She took the kettle that complains before it sings. We hugged on the steps and she said, "Hate me clean if you have to." And I told her I'd keep my anger in labeled drawers. Work forgave me by asking for the parts of me that earned their stipend. A case fan developed a whine only a patient screwdriver could soothe. A new guard needed to be taught that a velvet rope is an invitation to be better, not a suggestion. A donor asked why the Venetian room was so dark and left believing darkness is charity. I fell asleep easier in the control room than in my apartment, the monitors breathing like obedient animals. Naomi arrived without ceremony, which is the only introduction I trust. She's our painting's conservator, the person who persuades a century to be kind another decade. She smells like starch and citrus, and a whisper of solvent that erases itself before it can become a confession. She wears her hair up because gravity can be greedy. Her hands move like language you recognize before you translate it. We met properly over a portrait that had started to buckle where no one else could see. She tilted the light at a gentle, raking angle and murmured something soft enough the paint could pretend it was thinking for itself. "Canvas is anxious," she said. "It wants humidity a touch less dramatic." "The building can be coaxed," I said, and slid her a tablet with the controls. She glanced at me and smiled with one corner of her mouth, the way you smile at a tool that fits your hand. The first time we kissed was not cinematic. It was in the conservation lab after hours, the world beyond the glass pretending we were boring. She set her palm against my chest like she was making sure I was exactly where she'd left me. I put my mouth in the dip where her neck becomes shoulder and breath there until the part of her that makes decisions for a living lost its job for a minute. She kept her eyes open when she shivered, not distrust, delight in believing the room would stay put while she changed. I placed my hand where her voice begins and didn't ask it for anything. We stopped when we should. We laughed quietly, like criminals who prefer craft to chaos. With Naomi, precision became tenderness. We didn't use galleries or cases or anywhere a camera could pretend to be asleep. We used the lab with the shades drawn and a radio telling me if the building needed me. The little storeroom where linen and rabbitskin glue live like an old couple who can't quit. The tiny staff kitchen where the fluorescents forgive nothing, and therefore everything. She would swing herself onto a table and climb into my lap with the intention of a person testing a theory. I'd keep my hand at her throat and let my breath count out the courage we were borrowing. Between us, consent wasn't a contract. It was a technique we practiced until we were good at it. If you're waiting for revenge, I am a disappointing narrator. I could have delivered Kale's face to the board with the kind of footage that ends residencies and begins whisper campaigns. I could have leaked a still to a blog that pretends to respect culture while selling it by the pound. But the museum is a sanctuary for material that survives its makers. I won't make it a weapon. Also, Naomi likes me best when I come to her smelling of patience rather than victory. Myra and I became civilized in each other's presence. She stayed on as a consultant for a traveling show because she's excellent, and I'm not so proud I'd sabotage a gallery to scratch an itch. We texted like neighboring countries that share a river. She sent a photo of Basil misbehaving on a sill. I replied with a shot of sunlight crawling across our atrium floor in perfect squares. She wrote, "Proud of you," and the words landed like a hand on a shoulder without claiming to own it. Kale remained an artist whose work deserves a room even when his habits don't deserve a witness. Once, in a service corridor where we could pretend to be two men with a hallway in common, he nodded at the cameras and said, "You must despise unpredictability." I schedule it, I said and walked on. Months later, under a borrowed chandelier at a gala dressed in the kind of generosity that likes to be photographed, I found myself next to Myra at the balcony railing. Her hair was shorter. Her laugh seemed less busy. The atrium below us glowed with that expensive kind of warmth that convinces donors their goodness is a lifestyle. "Is she kind?" she asked, not asking for a name because manners are a religion where we come from. "She's specific," I said. "Specificity is kindness that knows how to hold a brush." "Be good to each other," she said, and in her mouth it wasn't a platitude. It was a benediction from someone who knows about sightlines. We toasted with water, because it's the only drink in the building that doesn't lie. The museum kept being itself. A child in the medieval room waved at a suit of armor until he believed it had waved back. A man tried to touch a bronze, and I caught his wrist gently enough he could keep his dignity. Someone cried quietly in front of a painting that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with the way we're made. The guards traded gossip like currency. The docents corrected me on facts I pretend to forget so they can feel necessary. The HVAC negotiated with summer. The vitrines were faithful. The tapestries breathed. Sometimes I wake at an hour with no name, in an apartment above a bakery that forgives my schedule with bread, Naomi's calf thrown over my thigh like punctuation. I put my hand where her voice begins and wait for breath to lift beneath it. The difference between ending and completion has a temperature you learn with your palm, not your mouth. I didn't know it then. I know it now. If you insist on a moral, the building will roll its eyes. Museums don't do morals, they do labels. I tell new guards what I tell myself when the night gets clever. We are here to carry weight without dropping it. Sometimes the weight is a crate. Sometimes it's a rule in a room full of desire. Sometimes it's a promise that you keep because you chose it when you had all the information. You learn which doors are sacred and keep them that way. You test before you touch. You keep records, not grudges. You try to be the kind of man who reaches for the person instead of the powder. At closing, I still make one last lap through the Dutch room. I run my knuckles along a case the way you pet a well-behaved animal. "All secure," I say into my radio, which is really my chest. The monitors wink their green little benedictions. The building sighs and believes me. I turn off the control room light and the dark returns like an old friend. I go home through streets that smell like baker's yeast and rain. In our bed, ours because we keep choosing it, I let the day evaporate off my skin. I put my mouth at Naomi's throat and breathe the truth I'm trying to keep. That sanctuaries are made, not found. That love is a maintenance schedule, not a miracle. That I can hold a museum at night without turning it into a witness. That I can hold a woman in the morning without asking her to be an alibi. And if Gallery 4 ever flirts with the Lux again, I'll notice. I'll choose whether to reach for the UV or the patience. Lately, I put my hand back on the console, breathe like a man who remembers the rooms he's sworn to, and say softly into the radio what the building needs to hear. We're good. Then I go back to bed, where the only sensor that matters is the one under my palm, and the only alarm worth answering is the little hitch in a breath that means yes, and the only artifact I'm charged to preserve is the promise we made in a room where the label is still being written.